Welcome to the Inner West Library Speaker Series and our Art Series. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. For this art series, we have asked three local artists to choose an item from the art book collection and talk about their choice and how it relates to their practice. This is the second podcast in the series and is related directly to the art book collection at Marrickville Library. Marrickville Library holds an impressive and historic art book collection ranging from Indigenous art to the Impressionists and beyond. Adrian Cook is an award-winning portrait and documentary photographer and has worked for major advertising agencies and magazines worldwide for the last 25 years. Adrian, while shooting digitally, has also focused on a process called wet plate collodion photography, invented in the 1850s. What fascinates him is the challenge of a process. Today, Adrian will speak about his choice of book, Art and Photography by Aaron Scharf. Adrian, can you tell us a little bit about your practice and your interests?
I'm a photographer. I've been a photographer for about 30 years. I kind of started off back in the days of film and processing, and I actually started off in the darkroom. And then I became an assistant to photographers in New York and London, and then I became a photographer for myself. And yeah, just a commercial photographer for about 15, well, up until now really. I shoot commercially, sort of advertising and magazines. But about 4 or 5 years ago, I started looking into alternative practices, and I picked up on what's called the wet plate process, which is a very old process that was invented in 1851, and it goes right back to the early days of photography. And so I've been pretty much doing that for the last 4 or 5 years. Probably about 70% of my work now is that. And that's shooting on using old cameras, old lenses, and shooting photographs directly onto glass bits of tin or bits of glass.
Yeah, I think your works. The wet plate photography are really amazing. They're very, very beautiful pieces. I looked at your website and I saw that. The library, as you know, we have a very large art book collection. What drove you to select your title?
Well, you do have a massive art collection of
Yeah.
books, but you don't have a big selection of photography
hmm
in the collection. So I'd hope to find a book about the wet plate process, because I'm always researching the process, whether online or looking for old books to buy. There isn't much out there. So the book that I did pick up is actually a book about art and photography, and which is really, really interesting. And there is a small portion in there about how photography started, and it quite detailed about the daguerreotypes and how it all began, really.
Also, I'm aware that you've worked with many authors and you have photographed authors for the Sydney Writers Festival. What is it about authors and their work that captures your eye?
About in 2007, I think it was, I've been seeing the festival happening every year for years, and I always wondered to myself why nothing was being done with these people who came into town for 2 weeks. And now great authors were passing through Sydney. Apart from seeing a few reportage shots in the newspapers, there was nothing that I could see that was being done with them. So I approached the festival. I said, look, can I photograph the authors during the festival? I said, I won't charge a fee. I just want a room where I can be, and we'll just feed them in during the day, and I'll take a portrait. And I ended up doing that until 2007 pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
I shot everything on film, which is quite nice. I wore a suit, had my camera on a tripod,
hmm
and I just had a window and a backdrop. So these authors would come in not knowing what to expect, probably expecting somebody with a massive lens and 35mm and brrr. And there I was in a suit, and I made them sit down, and I took a portrait using like a large format camera, which is great because it was really slow, and I got to chat to them. They usually brought their book along. I didn't photograph them with their book. It was always just a head and shoulders portrait pretty much. But I got to talk to them, talk to them about their book. And more often than not, I would buy the book, after the post festival, because it's always nice to read something where you know the person has written it. And I find that authors they're quite shy people. They're not actors. So everything is done usually they work by themselves in a room or whatever. And they're not great at publicity, so I found over the years that they'd come in, they'd see me, I'd take a portrait, and then quite often I'd get a call, maybe a year later or 6 months later, asking for a copy of the picture that they could use either for themselves or for a book cover or for a book jacket. So, yeah, it's really nice.
So how did they react towards you when you first got there? Did they know that you were coming to take their photo?
No idea. I just went through the festival and said, just let them know there's a free portrait for them if they want it. I put up on the website some examples of what I was going to do, and got in touch with all the publicists. And of course, once they found out it was free, they all came in.
And what about archiving those photos? Are they archived anywhere?
Yeah, I've got them all. I've still got all the
Okay,
negatives. Yeah. And actually, for the last 2 years or 3 years, I've actually been doing the portraits using wet plate. So I've been taking my little portable mobile darkroom down to the festival. They basically, again, I create a studio situation where they come in, they sit down. I take a portrait, I run out, I process the plate in my darkroom, and I run back out and show it to them. And that's been really nice. Yeah, quite special.
Can you talk a little bit about that portable studio?
The problem with wet plate photography is that you have to have a darkroom nearby. So what you do is you go into the darkroom, you get your piece of glass or aluminium tin, whatever you're going to use it on. You pour your chemicals onto the plate. That then goes into the back of the camera. You expose it, and then you run back into the darkroom and develop that plate. And it's all got to be done while that plate is still kind of wet or tacky, because once it dries out, there's no image, which is why it's called the wet plate process. Prior to the caravan, I just worked out of my studio, which is great, but it meant I was quite limited to what I could do. So what I did was I found an old 1955 wooden caravan, a beautiful shape, and I basically turned that into a darkroom, which means I can kind of go anywhere I want to now and take portraits using that process.
That's quite amazing, really. So how long does it take
to make the picture?
Yeah.
Well, I've just got back from 3 weeks around the central tablelands of New South Wales. I was up in a place called Gulgong and then Portland and Hill End.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing portraits out there and landscapes, and I basically do one portrait per hour. So by the time they come in, sit down, introduce themselves to me, I have a chat, I sit them down, I compose the image. I then leave them there for 5 minutes while I go into the darkroom and make a plate, come out, take the picture, back into the darkroom, develop it, come out, and then I show them the image. So about one. I can go quicker, but I like about one per hour, which is quite nice.
That's amazing.
I mean, compared to digital, where you can shoot, 5,000 per hour, it's really nice. And I'm not looking at screens all day too, which is another advantage.
And do you teach photography as well?
Yeah, I do. I do workshops with the wet plate process. Yeah, I can do any analog as well, but mostly the wet plate is what I teach these days.
Well, it's a very old process.
Yeah, 1851 is when it was invented.
Yeah. So speaking with you, Adrian, it seems to me that you're more interested in process rather than concept. Do you think that's right?
Well, I like with digital. The digital was great, when it first came in. It's what the client wants; they can see everything straight away. But for me, photography lost its magic. I love being in the darkroom. I love getting my hands dirty, and I love not knowing what's going to happen. And also, I love being very, very exact in the way I work. So with wet plate, you've got to be really accurate and know exactly what you're doing. You can know what the chemicals are doing, and also just the what you get by using a large format camera and what the wet plate process does is just really beautiful, which you can't mimic on digital or even on film these days. It's such a beautiful process. When you see a bit of silver on a bit of glass or a bit of tin, it's quite a lovely. It's almost like a painting in a way. It's not like looking at anything on a screen. It's not flat anymore. It has its own life to it. And again, it will last 200 years. So that's another thing I love about the fact that knowing that it's going to be picked up somewhere in 200 plus years, and they're going to wonder who that was or what was COVID-19 or.
But what led you to that? What led you to being so attracted to that process?
Boredom of digital, really. Digital just doesn't hold any surprises for me. It's great for commercial work. It's what clients want to see, but it wasn't making me get out of bed every morning. Yeah. Where wet plate does that. And also with wet plate, I'm always learning. It's such a tricky process that if the weather's warmer today than tomorrow, it'll change something somewhere along the lines. Yeah, it's what I'm always learning. I think that's what I miss most about digital. Kind of you get to a point with digital where it's all the same.
You talked a little bit about your time as a photographer, such a long time you've been working in that field. What drives you as an artist, and what would you say to any young artist starting out?
If you love it, just go for it. I think if you're good at, if you really enjoy what you do, you'll be good at it. Because it makes you get up in the morning. And that's what I told my kids too. Not necessarily in art, but just in life. If you enjoy something and are looking for a career, then just chase that thing that you enjoy. Don't do a job just because it's good money. Do a job because you love it.
You're passionate.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's sport or whether it's photography or whether you enjoy music or whatever. Designing. I think if you enjoy what you do, you'll just be better at it than the bloke who doesn't particularly love it.
So, as a child growing up, did you have that passion for photography?
No, I kind of developed that when I left home when I was about 20. I went overseas travelling. I kind of just picked up a camera, started taking pictures, and then thought I like this. Maybe there's a way I can make a living out of it. Yeah, just through perseverance, knocking on doors and assisting, I ended up being a photographer. Yeah, purely by chance, really.
That's amazing. So you were inspired, basically.
Yeah, it just came through travelling and taking pictures, and then showing my pictures to people, and them saying, "Oh, you have a good eye, nice composition." Just kind of went on from there, really.
So, what is a good eye?
Well, I think composition, really. For me, a good photograph is good composition. It's whether you see it happening before it happens or whether you compose it in front of you. To me, that's always a good photograph. If it works upside down, it's a good picture.
As I work in the library, I need to ask you, at the moment during COVID, what are you reading or listening or watching?
Election in America.
Okay, yes.
I'm reading I'm reading a lot of old books on photography about wet plate. I'm looking for old recipes for the stuff I use to make a plate. Lots of old recipes out there. Listening to music. I listen to music all the time, and it's pretty much my own music that I've had since I was 17. So it was all records and tapes, which I've converted onto my iPod. So it's all old music, but great music. And actually, no, some of my son's music. My son's he's into hip hop and stuff, but occasionally I'll hear something of his and go, "Oh, can you send me that?" Because it's particularly the old hip hop from the 80s was great. Yeah, reading a lot of. I'm always reading books about early Australia if I can, about Cook and those guys when they first came over. Movies, yeah, the election. Kind of obsessed with that at the moment. Watching that.
So no fiction, mostly non-fiction.
Mostly non-fiction. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do like Rebus though. I read it whenever he comes
you?
out. I'm always getting a new Rebus book.
Adrian, the book that you have read, can you tell us more about that?
So the book was called Art of Photography by a guy called Aaron Schwar. And it was quite interesting because it spoke about how when photography was invented, how it affected the art world. It did things like, prior to photography, portrait painting was a huge thing, and especially portrait miniaturists who painted small paintings. And photography basically got rid of that work. A lot of the portrait miniaturists were the first artists to embrace the daguerreotype, either to work as a photographer or to use it within their work. Also, many of them found new occupation in colouring photographs. And the funny thing was, the Art Journal reported in 1857 that portrait photography had become so popular as to create a public nuisance. I found quite funny. A new kind of pose was invented, when you see the people with a hand on the face as if there's like a pensive mood. That was actually done to steady the face during the long exposures for photography. By the 1870s, it was generally known that no painter of the day would attempt to paint a portrait without having a good photograph of the sitter. So prior to that, it was all done, over days and days and days, like in real life. And also the invention of photography went on to have a huge influence on how painters painted, in particular the Impressionists like Degas and Monet, where they started to use movement in their paintings and reportage feelings like street photography. And the composition too, how they started cutting off people's legs and perspective, where they started foreshortening images like the way a lens would use it. So yeah, I found all that really interesting through this book, which I didn't realise at the time. Now when you look at those paintings, you can see how they use what a lens does in their compositions.
That's really interesting. I think maybe we should be getting more books on photography for the library.
I think so.
if you have any suggestions, let us know, and we can actually buy them, you know?
Yeah, there's lots of books out there. But again, it's a great collection you have. Like, it's particularly painting. It's a really great collection of. And I was
Yeah,
really blown away by the music, by the library. It was my first time I went there, like I said before, and I think it's fantastic. Yeah.
excellent. When you spoke about the portraits, photography in the
hmm
1800s, they were always staged, weren't they?
Yeah, pretty much staged because there were slow exposures of the photography. So that people used to they didn't have flash equipment like I do. So everything was done with daylight or with hot lights. So a typical
Mm,
exposure would have been about 4 or 5 seconds, which is
right.
why if you look at those old photographs, no one smiles.
No.
It's because they can't hold a smile for 6 seconds. So we're told not to smile. And most of them, you can't see it, but they've got a brace behind their head so they don't move. So they're kind of held in position.
Really? Wow.
So unfortunately, that generation looked like a really glum generation, but they weren't. They're just normal people, but told not to smile.
That's
Yeah.
fascinating.
And the funny thing
Totally.
is, with me, I find even though people can smile these days, because I use flash, people tend not to. Don't know what it is, but people just because they know it's only one plate, one image, so the people just tend to be themselves, which
Hmm.
I find quite interesting. Given the
Yeah,
option they have to smile or not smile, they tend not to.
interesting. Thank you so much, Adrian. Adrian Cook Photography is located in Leichhardt. If you would like to see Adrian or pay a visit, please visit his website, adriancookphotography.com. Thank you so much for listening, and please come and visit Marrickville Library to explore the amazing art book collection and also our online resources. And don't forget to look out for upcoming digital content for the In West Library What's On and social media channels. Thank you.